Good Good morning, everyone. Happy March. Happy spring, technically. Thank you for coming to another month of the Regional Housing Forums for the Schoodic region. I'm Greg Paduke, Regional Planner of the Hancock County Planning Commission, joined as mostly always by Olivia Jolly, another regional planner in our office. And this month, we are very excited to be joined by Erin Aguayo, who is a grant specialist. Is that your official title?
Think that's the official title. Basically, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program manager.
Manager of the Vermont Housing Improvement Program with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development in Vermont. And Erin has graciously decided to join us this morning and talk about the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, which is now in version 2.0, and she'll explain what that is. And she'll talk about some of the programs that are part of the VHIP and how they're being executed and successful in the state, and maybe even how some of those programs could be implemented or, in a way, transferred to a local or regional level, and something that we as a region can talk about and maybe dive more into as we learn more about what's happening in Vermont. And so, without further ado, Erin, I will pass it off to you and I'll let you explain everything since you are the knowledgeable person on all of this. Thank you again for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always exciting to get to connect with our neighbors and share what we're doing and hopefully spread the VHIP message far and wide. I am Erin Aguayo. I am, the grants management specialist is the technical state term for the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, which is a series of three programs that are all under the VHIP umbrella. Basically, every time a different source of funding comes into play, we have to rewrite all the documents and call it something a little different. So it's effectively the same program. We started in 2020 with some CARES Act funding, COVID era funding, to try and do some housing relief. And I do have a PowerPoint. I'm going to give it a go here. Share. Did that did that show up for everyone?
Yes. It's looking pretty good.
Okay. And now I'm wondering if it's gonna work when I click on the screen. So there is VHIP, and it is not excited about changing slides. Oh, there it is. Okay. So VHIP is the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program, and it's designed to repair Vermont's housing stock and provide long-term affordable housing to, especially we target Vermont's most vulnerable residents, people exiting homelessness, refugees, people exiting foster care, incarceration, farm work organizations, and so on, domestic violence prevention. And then since 2020, property owners receive grants and forgivable loans through CARES Act and ARPA funding. And now this version 2.0 that we're working with is receiving Vermont state general funds. So the state itself has taken on funding VHIP. And through the program, you can repair existing units, build new ones, repair systems or structural elements in a building, or add an ADU to your personal property. And there are also now additional funds available to people who want to do accessibility improvements or ADA compliance. And this is a before and after. I know it looks like a paint job. I promise you this was gutted on the inside too. And when I started a couple of years ago, this was the only photo we had of any of our hundreds of completed units. So we're working on our outreach. And for VHIP project options, our bread and butter is unit rehab. Vermont, much like Maine, has a much older and aging housing stock. And there are a lot of difficult to repair 1880s buildings that require just some additional incentive or funding for people to manage to do a rehab and make those code compliant and turn them into rental units. So the vast majority of our projects end up being unit rehab. You can also build an ADU, and we've had a lot of interest in this from people. Some are looking for a place to put their mother-in-law or their brother, but a lot of people are just looking to expand their options, use their property to its fullest, address Vermont has a housing crisis where vacancies in some places, rental vacancies are at like 0.5%, 1%. I mean, it's almost a negative vacancy. So ADUs are a way to address that with existing space. VHIP 2.0 adds a new construction option. New construction in Vermont of your average 2-bedroom affordable unit is running $500,000 to $600,000, and VHIP incentives are significantly below that cost. So we aren't seeing as many people taking us up on ground up new construction, but now if you get a VHIP award, you could apply that to a foundation up project. Tenant occupied is not advertised, but if a project comes in and one of the units has someone in it, but they're in dire straits and they need code compliance repairs, the landlord can also apply for some additional funding to fix up that unit as well. It is a struggle to keep this from becoming a deferred maintenance program, so we try not to broadcast that. And we've added this accessibility rider. So any of these 4 projects, if they are approved, can add up to $20,000 additionally to make them compliant with any level of ADA compliance, visitable, adaptable, or fully accessible. And so they would come up with their estimated cost from their verifiable, I'm not going to say certified contractor who understands ADA compliance, and then they could get some additional funds if they want to create an ADA unit. Here in Rutland County, Vermont has a lot of struggling properties, and so we have some before and afters of a large older building. And a lot of our property owners take restoration into account in addition to rehabilitation. So like they saved the door. In fact, it looks like they brought in some doors, but they try to preserve original woodwork where they can. In a lot of cases, they try to bring back some of the exterior character. Let's see. And then, does anyone have any questions before I plow ahead about project types? Or okay, so funding, this is from the property owner's perspective. VHIP provides up to $30,000 a unit to rehab 0 to 2-bedroom units, and then $50,000 a unit to rehab larger 3+ bedroom units, or for more extensive projects, conversion of any unit within an existing structure that is not currently an apartment, you can receive a larger amount of money. Like if you're turning a sugar shack into apartments, even if they're smaller apartments, they qualify for this larger. We do have sugar shacks, banks, dairy barns, any commercial space that's converted, or if you have an attic that's not currently an apartment, they would qualify for this larger amount. Also, we allow structural elements that impact the whole structure to receive an award, and just you have to make sure that you encumber one of the units in the building when it's all done and rented out as a VHIP unit. So foundation work, roofing, lead and asbestos mitigation, things like that. Sprinklers, Vermont has some sprinkler laws that can get kind of heavy. And also $50,000 a unit if you are doing new unit creation, like new construction. Or, oh right, ADUs also, since they're often fully new construction, qualify for this larger amount. And then up to $20,000 additional per unit if you're developing ADA. And then these are going to be maybe a little less relevant to you guys, but there are some funding rules that go with, oops, oh no, I don't know how to go back. Here, hold on. Oh. So VHIP property owners, this is an incentive program, and and they receive reimbursements for sunk cost in construction at different points during a project. So before they receive any reimbursements, a property owner has to prove that they have spent at least 20% of the award on the project upfront. So they basically have to begin the project on their own, and once they match 20% of the award funds, they can start submitting receipts to VHIP for reimbursement. They also sign a forgivable loan agreement where they agree to charge at or below fair market rent for 5 or 10 years. We have 5 and 10-year tracks for this program. If you sign the shorter track, you are also obligated to sign tenants who are exiting homelessness. And they are expected to complete the project within 18 months of signing the agreement. This compliance varies. We do have extensions. Landlords now have to complete an interactive fair housing education series that CVOEO, I'll look it up, puts out to make sure they understand fair housing law, which we explain that frequently. They have to accept a credit score of 500 and above, along with a longer list of guidelines that we have in a guide that we send out, and I'll make sure you all have it. And they can charge no more than 1 month's rent for a deposit. And people fight that one, but no pet deposits, no special application fees, none of that. We're trying to keep this accessible and fair. They have to take paper applications. There are some other guidelines. Here is a complete gut everything, also in Rutland. This was a derelict property for 20 plus years on a main street in Rutland, Vermont. And so they added exterior cladding. They've added a fully accessible ramp. This is not quite done yet. I realized after I took the picture, this was still under construction. It's like, oh, up on the second story, you have your toddler ejection space and the railing. It's done now. But the ground floor units, there are 2 of them, are fully ADA accessible. This property owner did that before that incentive was in place, so they just chose to make ADA units. And the town is pretty happy about this. This took a property that it had been full of criminal activity and not particularly attractive, and has really turned it into a place people enjoy driving by, and we get a lot of feedback like that. Does anyone have any questions so far? And we're going to hold very specific questions to the end, but if you have some clarification on what I've presented, I'm happy to entertain that. But okay, we're almost there. At the moment, all of our reimbursements or financial mechanisms are forgivable loans. So they are 0% interest, technically, loans. And every year that you remain in compliance, you're forgiven a portion of the loan. So for 5-year projects that take homeless tenants, they're forgiven at 20% a year for the 5 years of their compliance period. And people can buy out of these loans if they need to, if for some reason they need to sell the property and don't want to try to sell it with the encumbrance. It is an option for them to buy out and pay back the loan. We haven't, most people are pretty dedicated to this program once they start. We haven't seen a lot of people trying to do that. But they're going to rent at fair market rent for 5 years to people exiting homelessness or similarly vulnerable tenants. And this is the exterior of that Rutland rehab you saw earlier with the wood floor hallway. So they did a nice job with that. And you can choose a 10-year forgivable loan, also 0% interest, forgiven at 10% a year. And really the only requirement is renting ideally to lower income residents, but renting at fair market rent for 10 years. And that is me that monitors all of these projects. We have about 1,200 done and ongoing projects, 800 finished, and I have to keep track of everybody's rentals and rental rates and tenants and all of that. So here is an interior from Barrie, Vermont. We have very enthusiastic property owners and for whom these grants and loans really are the incentive to do something that otherwise wouldn't have penciled out. Like this unit, I believe this building has 3 units in it and would have been awarded $150,000 plus their match. But this is a full gut down to the studs, all new insulation, all new appliances, but saved the floors. So people are doing really beautiful work. This isn't, I say we're providing dignified housing. It's not just code compliant. People really do, it's their own property, they care about it, and they really put a lot of effort in. And if you are looking to get paid, disbursement schedule, once you make that 20% match and you start your project, you can submit receipts for up to 35% of your award near the beginning, and they'll have someone to come out and look at the property. At the halfway point, there's another inspection, 25% disbursement, and then there's a final inspection and certificate of occupancy, and you'll receive another 25% of the award. And we found it's handy to hold back a little bit for that lease to make sure people feel compelled to really see it all the way through. And once the leases are signed, they receive the remainder of their funds. This program is administered on the ground through Vermont's 5 homeownership centers. They're all NeighborWorks organizations under the umbrella of NeighborWorks, the national, or I don't know how familiar you are with that, but Vermont has 5 of them. California has 3. So Vermont's does some hyper-local work with affordable housing through these organizations. And so at the state level, I work out grant agreements with these homeownership centers, and then they serve their service area through VHIP. They take applications, which we develop here, and they review the applications, choose the projects, they set up the inspections. They're the ones reimbursing the project owners directly. And then they invoice us for that. So after they pay out these projects and their inspectors have taken a look and say, good to go, they send us invoices and we reimburse them through the grant. So there are probably 12 full-time people on VHIP around the state through these homeownership centers. Here's another one in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, St. Johnsbury. And they decided they got a really good deal through a buddy on knotty pine, and they decided everything was going to be really beautiful. I believe it's shiplap pine. They put in new stairways that are ADA compliant, fully currently code compliant, new kitchens, new lighting. So they're doing some pretty impressive work, often on a shoestring. We get a lot of contractors who are buying their first home that needs attention, and this funding is just enough for them to decide they'll make it affordable housing. So a little less relevant for you guys, but there are a decent number of requirements for those 5-year projects on choosing tenants, but everyone has to adhere to fair housing law and choose tenants that meet the requirements of the project they signed on to, and back to 500 credit score and 1 month's rent. And if people are having trouble finding tenants or choosing tenants, they also call me, and there are a few other people around the state who can assist with this as well. Ooh, and one more. Oh, right. And every year I request a recertification. We have surveys they fill out to say how much they're charging, and then we run those numbers through a calculator we made up to make sure they really are charging fair market rent. And a lot of them on accident are not. And then we get in touch with them and we all work out what FMR is and then have them adjust leases. So we want to really try and keep this program accessible to Vermonters. And these are the home ownership centers around the state, which counties they manage. I'm not sure if Maine has any similar set of organizations but VHIP works because of these hyperlocal or people who are able to assess the needs of their area. Like even for a state with so few people, there are variable housing markets and real estate markets. And so it's nice having people who understand the needs of people near them and be a face our property owners can contact directly about their project. Here
I was
is an
going to ask
AD.
if you know how the state formed its relationship with NeighborWorks and formed those local centers, and I guess how that process happened, if you know.
So I work for the housing division for the state, and the housing division in 2020 was Arthur, who managed our manufactured home registrations, and Sean, who managed Arthur and policy on housing. And when this money came in, Sean basically did a napkin back proposal, like wrote out, I'd like to do this with some CARES Act funding. And I would suspect he already knew people at these organizations personally through his policy work in housing. He'd been here for maybe 7 years before that. So I think it was more a personal connection, but they are the groups in Vermont that manage most of the affordable housing development. They often have development arms that are harnessing federal tax incentive programs. I think LIHTC is often through them. And I think They, let's see, like all of the permanent affordable housing or subsidized, permanently subsidized housing in Vermont, for the most part, seems to be run through them, with the odd contributions from Habitat for Humanity and similar organizations. But if you have a NeighborWorks organization in Maine, they would probably be more than willing to hear out a proposal for something like this. Basically, we send the funding to them; they pay their people with the funding, and this is now a program that they're all running. But I would suspect it took some number of meetings to get this set up with the homeownership centers.
Okay, that's good to
Since it
know.
didn't with them,
Yeah,
but it's interesting.
we'll have to look into their involvement in Maine and what sort of relationships there might be out there. That's helpful.
Right. HOC. And no one has ever asked that question before. So I'll run that by Sean. He is very sick today. He would have joined us, but he's almost delirious, poor guy. So I will run that question by him in a few days and see what he's got. So this is an example of an ADU in Montpelier, Vermont, where I live. We've got the garage on the bottom and then a lovely apartment right above that with a separate entrance, keeping the snow off. No uncovered exterior stairs here. So, and there's the interior of that ADU. So this is a family who we make these a lower priority, but there are people who want to house aging relatives close to them. And there is a lot of demand for that in Vermont. In addition to our housing, our population is getting better as they age, but also looking for ways to age in place or age with supportive families. So there are a handful of people who've put in units through VHIP that currently serve in that capacity. And just a couple of stats. This didn't. Oh, all right. Where did the arrows go? So overall, since 2020, VHIP, the blue is VHIP 2.0, the green is VHIP 1.0, or the ARPA funding. That's our intermediate program, is wrapping up some units. So we have 342 units under construction right now, and 854 are completed. This yellow is that very first bit of funding. We have just hit in the last few months, the very first units to complete have completed their 5-year compliance period and are starting to exit the program. We are running surveys by request of our state legislature to verify or kind of ascertain who is still going to continue charging affordable rents and who is not. And we've had an overwhelmingly positive response, and almost everyone is happy with their current tenants and their current rental rates and are not planning on raising rent or not planning on turning it into an Airbnb. And so that is heartening, and it's some data that we'll continue to collect as those units exit their compliance period. And then on the left here are the counties of Vermont and how many units for VHIP have been completed in each. Some of these are extremely rural areas, and we struggle to find people who want to participate or in a position to participate in VHIP. We also try to keep an eye on units being places that are accessible to the populations that need them. So if it's not near public transportation, if it's not near jobs, it's often a lower priority project. But Chittenden County is where Burlington is, so we get a lot of interest there. There's a desperate need for housing there. And then for VHIP 2.0, what we're currently doing, here's like a little project breakdown. The vast majority of these are still rehabilitations of properties, 261 projects, 70 units, someone's breaking ground, 43 ADUs, and then 37 of those units that are currently occupied. VHIP's main goal is to produce new rental units to the market. And so we do try not to take on too many that are already occupied, since that is not technically a new rental unit. But for the VHIP 2.0 has been in effect about 2 years now, and about $20 million has been granted directly to property owners for the projects at the left there. And then the estimated property owner match of that, although they're required to match 20%, typically they're in, what construction costs, they're investing more like 100% or 110% in the project compared to the award. We keep track of how many years of affordability this means, 525 for 2.0 for 429 units. And at the moment, the average award per unit is $45,000. And then we have a breakdown of our 5 and 10 years and how many of these are completed or upcoming. Since it's a newer set of projects, most of these are still under construction, but every month we have a few more that complete. For me to leave this here for a second. I just feel like I'm talking at you for a long time. We're almost there. And if you are worried about housing your vulnerable populations, Vermont also has a handful of supports for vulnerable tenants and for landlords housing vulnerable tenants. The vast majority of the units intended for serving homelessness do, and we work with our coordinated entry system, which is a system that keeps track of all people experiencing homelessness in Vermont, or as possible, all. And then they send referrals to our landlords to match up with these apartments. And frequently that works out. Occasionally it doesn't. And landlords will receive a waiver to seek tenants from the general population. Everybody's at FMR check. And then there's also landlord liaisons around the state that facilitate these relationships. There's a landlord tenant mediation program that has just There's also a landlord relief program that isn't mentioned here, but Vermont keeps a fund for landlords willing to house people exiting homelessness, where if they experience loss of rental income, like someone just stops paying, or significant damages to the property, the landlord relief fund will reimburse the landlord for that. So it makes it a little less, still risky, but a little less risky financially to take on challenging tenants. And I don't have the numbers on how many of our landlords end up using that program, but of those who find themselves in a difficult place, quite a few have taken advantage of it. Oh, there it is. Okay. And that is what we've got. We also have a resource guide on our website. If you're interested in VHIP, we maintain a current website. We keep our program statistics there and update those the first week of every month. Our fair market calculator, which we have a really brilliant team member who came up with, I think it's 1,400 if-then statements in Excel to come up with fair market rent, with every utility deduction possible for every county in Vermont for every year of the program. So you can go and find out what fair market rent looks like in Vermont if you're letting the tenant pay for electric cooking, whatever it is. And what else? All kinds of information as well as our contacts. And then this is an amazing building that has, I believe, 5 VHIP units in it, down also in Rutland. Rutland has an interesting housing market where it is full of relatively affordable homes to purchase that need a lot of love. So it's been a really great candidate for this program. But I will leave that up for us. I don't know, should I leave that up or do you want to stop the share and get back to everyone's faces?
You can start sharing if you like. And we'll make sure that all those links that Erin shared are provided. We'll put them on our website on the forum page, and we'll send them out in follow-up email post forum. So I could think of a handful of questions, but we'll hand off to anyone else that might have questions to start. And thank you for that presentation.
Yeah. Thank you all. Well, maybe you should be brave, Greg.
This
Hey,
program seems to be aimed primarily at rentals. Is there any program to subsidize home ownership?
So let me see. In the housing division, there isn't a home construction program. Our home ownership centers that I mentioned earlier do have programs to support home repairs and home construction. I believe there are missing middle programs like the missing middle class home construction as a concept. And I think there's another group in the Agency of Commerce and Community Development that administers community development block grants. And sometimes towns could apply. I think those usually end up as rentals, but there are some options there. But Vermont at the moment doesn't have an incentive program for people to build a home, like development homes. I know that we're working on, if you look up Homes for All, is another Vermont program that's working on making it easier to develop homes for either development and sale or rental by creating a catalog. I think it's called 802 Homes. It's almost like a Sears Craftsman catalog of designs.
Right.
And we're working on getting those designs approved for an expedited permitting process. In Vermont, permitting, it can be very slow and expensive. And so we've identified that as an impediment to developing new homes as well as rental housing. And so these homes will be in keeping with the local character of architectural character of other buildings. And there are options for single family homes as well as multifamily structures that would fit into existing architectural landscapes. And so hopefully with those elements in place, they'll be in place to have small and medium-sized developers or large developers use those designs as a way to expedite that process and to make it more affordable. They're also doing trainings for small developers on how to develop housing in Vermont, and we've seen a lot of interest in that. We had 65 people come out in an actual blizzard for an 8-hour training a couple Saturdays ago, which is pretty impressive. I was surprised how many people were willing to brave sliding off the highway to come hear about how to develop small housing developments. And there's a lot of interest in that. So we're really hoping by easing the entry into that through these trainings and through permitting processes. Let me see. I'll make sure that the Homes for All link gets included.
I
But,
put it in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you. And that is it's run by a couple of the departments in our agency. So we have someone in our group that's working on the small developer training. We have someone in another group managing that catalog, the housing catalog. But it's a great program. It's it's a little harder to pinpoint. It's harder to say, oh, Homes for All has created X number of houses. It's a little more flexible. I don't know that the permitting expedition is in place yet. So once that is, I think it'll be easier for them to have some numbers on how that's working out. It's a temporary program that was started by someone I think they were looking to get into grad school and thought, let's do this. And they did get into grad school. And now there's some temporary funding through the end of 2026 for that. So I'm really hoping that we're going to be able to fund that more fully and keep that going. Not
So
sure.
to launch, a similar version of VHIP, or even just one of the programs that VHIP offers, what sort of organizational setup, infrastructure, would be needed at a county level or regional level to get something started, or just have those conversations and maybe get something off the ground, something that can be implemented at that level?
Sure. So VHIP is a flexible program, which is wonderful because you can implement it at smaller levels or at larger levels. If you have a limited amount of funding and capacity for it, you could start with just a town or just a city. And Vermont started with a surprise influx of $7 million, which for our state was more money than they'd seen in quite a while for housing incentives. So but I would say you're looking for someone who can directly manage the program, needs to be in place. It's a high touch program because of its flexibility. Every person that comes is quite often, a first time developer, or perhaps they've fixed up a building and they're renting out a building that's falling into disrepair, or they've inherited a farmhouse they don't know what to do with. So it takes a lot of guidance to get people through VHIP if you're targeting new and small developers, which is a goal for the state. But you're looking for someone who can directly engage with the property owners, who can set up inspections, who can make sure that those payments go out on a regular basis to each participant. And then you also need someone who can manage the higher level organizations. So policies, what do you do if someone wants this? Can we do this? Like the can we do this question takes up a lot of our time. But and then after you have if you have capacity, if you have people who might be able to, I guess, if you have an organizational system that can accommodate that structure, right? Like someone put, I'm the state level organizer and we have a housing division. Okay, that's a logical place. That's where we are. You could run this out of one nonprofit if you want to start small, right? Like you could have a team of 1.5 people plus the inspector at a nonprofit just managing this. It depends on how much money you're talking, how many projects. So then you would need funding. So if you're getting funding at the state or even federal level, like VHIP so far has assigned nearly $50 million to this program. The vast majority, well, actually not vast, but the majority of that is federal, but the state of Vermont is now given about 26, nearly 30 million, oh, maybe more to the program because it's been really effective in creating new affordable housing units. So depending on where your funding's coming from could probably determine who you approach to actually run the program and organize the program. You could certainly scale the program back quite a bit, like the monitoring portion. If you just want to create new housing, that is it. That is about half as much work as creating new housing and then monitoring it for 10 years, right? To make sure that they're doing what you hope they're doing with it. So there are a lot of ways to make it a little simpler. We do have a sister program for the repair of people's manufactured housing or mobile homes. And that is a program to fix up, these are for homeowners, people who own their homes or park owners. They receive direct grants, they perform the work, and once it's determined the work was finished successfully, that project is marked done, and they don't have to monitor that anymore. And that would be a way to, if you weren't terribly concerned about making sure people followed the rules about, and fair market rent isn't far below market rent, right? Like if you don't have the capacity for this sprawling monitoring effort, you could decide that it's sufficient for you to create these units to rehab struggling buildings in town centers, like people are still very happy with that. So there are ways to make this more manageable depending on your interest, what your goals are, and capacity. And I am more than happy to share every document we have, all of our policies. A lot of this was hard won, but if anyone is interested in starting a program like this, I'd be more than happy to go over like at a really granular level what needs to happen and what the challenges.
So sounds like capacity and funding are things we both things we need. So I mean, it's somewhere to start at least. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess expanding on that point, I'm just wondering, Vermont's really impressive, the different ways that they're tackling housing, the amount of housing trusts and all the different programs, sister programs you're talking about. And I'm just curious how your thoughts as far as just in isolation VHIP without all those other supporting programs and efforts, how it holds together. Is VHIP something that you can kind of start with trying to use that as a tool, or do you think it needs some of the other sister programs or state programs or national programs to help it? I know it's a tough question it's a big question.
It's a loaded question, right? Of course,
yes.
VHIP couldn't exist as it does without the support of many others. I mean, the legislature develops the statutes that govern the program with information from us, but they've definitely taken it upon themselves. They're pretty proud of the program. And then on the ground, the way we're structured, we're using existing organizations to actually run the program who already have the capacity and experience to do that. And without them, like trying to run this from our state offices in Montpelier for the breadth of the state would be extremely difficult. I don't know about impossible, but it would get a lot more onerous to try to get inspectors out to the furthest reaches of the state over and over again to try to you need cultivate community relations in very different communities, could be more challenging. We certainly rely on, the Vermont State Housing Authority provides us with utility allowances for our fair market rent. And I guess we could make those up, but it's very handy that they come up with, we have 14 counties and they come up with what every utility for every fuel type gets as a utility deduction every year for every county, for every set of how many bedrooms and multi or single families. So, and we get support from other organizations, helping place tenants, the coordinated entry system, and homelessness prevention systems in Vermont do a lot of heavy lifting for that portion of the program. And in theory, VHIP is providing housing, and it's helpful to them to have it. But it's a program that is intricately connected to easily a dozen other organizations around the state, and it would be weakened if those didn't exist. That said, if you wanted to create a VHIP out of thin air, it is certainly possible. I would start smaller. You might have fewer goals. The things that do involve a lot of monitoring or a lot of interaction with other agencies might need to be scaled back. But it's a really interesting question.
Great. Yeah, not VHIP, but that's great. Thank you.
In a vacuum, I think you could provide money to people who want to rehab their old buildings and have people rehab old buildings. So it depends on how much more you want to add to that. We certainly benefit quite a bit from all of our partners' expertise and efforts.
And I think you had an interesting number in terms of the amount of funding that has gone to VHIP versus the sister programs for housing, and how much of the housing that's been developed in Vermont through all of those programs. It was like, in our conversation, it was like a quarter of the housing for not even a quarter of the funding.
Yes. So I, along with a bunch of other organizations, participated with Vermont Digger is it's an investigative reporting group in Vermont, but they have a housing specialist that works with them. And they collected data from all over the state about COVID dollars that came in from the federal government to Vermont for the last, I think it was through 2024 is what they were looking at, and housing that was produced. And Vermont received in the range of $780 million of federal assistance and COVID era funding that they applied to housing. And of that, it was broken down into groups. I think VHCB, all the acronyms will get me, but they broke it down, and it was really helpful to see that the Vermont Housing Improvement Program received, I think $40 million out of $780 million. And they were looking at the production of rental housing. Vermont produced, 4,500 rental units in that time, or 41, and VHIP was 23% of that production. So for a tiny fraction of the received funding, 40 million out of 780 million, VHIP produced 23% of the rental units that appeared for all of the housing efforts. And a lot of that has to do with property owners put in another $50 million, right? So there is more that would still put us at well under the expenditures. It's an excellent program because it's an incentive system. It doesn't have some of the overhead or restrictions that, large scale affordable development has. Like large scale affordable development that adheres to all those development requirements in Vermont is about $600,000 a unit now in multi-unit projects to produce affordable housing. And even like I worked with Habitat here, and it's costing, to put up an affordable duplex with like wholesale prices on materials and volunteer labor is running about $1 million for a duplex, $800,000 for a duplex. So it's a tough environment to do development and to provide critically needed housing. So providing these incentives to people who already own buildings that don't quite know what to do with them, or the financials didn't pencil out, has been really a success for thrifty Vermonters. They really like thriftiness. They really like to see people doing, independent effort. It meets a lot of cultural kind of what would you call it, emotional needs of people to see that their neighbors are working hard for this money. We do get the nosy neighbors like, why did this guy get this much money? We are required by law to publish who got money and how much and where they are, so that's always fun. But
That's relatable here as well.
yeah, right. I
Along
suspect it's similar.
along the lines of creating units at or below fair market value, are those incentives enough to get people to do it, or is there something more that is incentivizing folks to develop units at those income levels?
So I will say those incentives were much more incentivizing in 2020, 2021, when
Yeah.
materials and labor cost about half what they do now. I mean, but what's amazing to me is the same incentive. We haven't increased the incentive funding since the program's inception. We still have a waiting list. We still have people looking for this money and applying this money. We still have plenty of buildings that need this. I think we're getting close, though. We do get feedback, especially from our more expensive housing markets, and that it is not enough. You know, if the permitting on a property is $70,000, what's our $50,000 going to do? But also, I'm not going to call it free money. We do get a lot of landlords on the phone with me doing the math in their head. Well, if I charge fair market rent and I could have charged this much and you give me this much, I'll come out even. And then we have to have a chat about being involved in your community and your expenses and so on. So I do think that in the future we'll have to look at slightly larger incentives to make this work for people. But at the moment, all the fingers crossed. It's still incentivizing people, especially the people we're looking for who are first time or small developers, people who are thinking about it but haven't quite decided to take the leap on, that old farmhouse or putting the ADU on their back 40 or whatever they want to do. So
So, but as you, because you've partially answered my question, which was the incentives being statewide, it appears to be. Look, and I'm assuming that Vermont is similar to Maine, where $50,000 per unit would go a long way in the county I live in. If you live in Cumberland County, where Portland, for example, that's like a drop in the bucket. So as you guys look at your incentives and possibly raising some, is it something that would be possible or to consider by taking a look at each individual county separately, and that the incentive can stay and others, or even lower, maybe, and some raise. Is that something that, if you were to look back, is that something that you might say we really should consider the housing markets in how far those incentives will go?
right. So, from a purely practical perspective, the answer to that is yes, you should definitely do that. But from that, why did my neighbor get this much and I did not perspective, we have kept it equal across the state. Whether or not that's equitable is another story. But there's definitely a concern among participants and Vermonters about fairness, about as opposed to equity. And, certainly we're seeing people in Burlington struggle to make any affordable development work. We're getting very few viable applications from small developers where, the median house price is 550, I think, in Burlington, where in Rutland County, where a lot of those photos were from, it's 250, right? And so we certainly have the statistics to come up with almost a sliding scale award system, but I am but the lone VHIP person at the state who has to answer the phones. So if you were to start this program and administer it across Maine, that would be a decision that you would need to make, right? That there are certainly places where this money goes further. Those are the places in Vermont where we see a lot more of this development. We see a lot more uptake on VHIP because the numbers work out so much better. And what on the upside, those are places that really needed revitalization, right? Like Burlington doesn't really need this kind of investment. They do need affordable housing, but that's a tricky walk when they can get, I don't want to think what rents are there. In fact, fair market rent is still far out of reach for a lot of Vermonters in a lot of part of the state, and something we struggle with. Like that's a number that was set just to try and keep it fair. Oh, fair market rent for your area is what the rent has to be. But now we're seeing our units sitting empty because fair market rent, like in, a 3-bedroom apartment 45 minutes from Burlington is almost $3,000 a month fair market rent. I mean, that is not, Vermonters, a family income median is $79,000. I don't know. Where am I going with this? Definitely your choice, and there are reasons to look at setting up the structure either way.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Evan, another question, if anybody else is. Just a question about has finding contractors to do the work been a challenge, and has the program been working with building those relationships and people in that trade that can do the work?
Yes, very. Vermont is a state with very few people. I think when we moved, the average age of a contractor is in their 50s at this point, although there are trade centers around the state starting to train high schoolers to do all kinds of blue collar work, trades work. But we have talked about a contractor pool. But you get into it would like over a significant number of miles, keeping track of people who are not licensed in any way to do. Let me back up. Most of these projects are 1 or 2 units. A lot of them are by people who don't have any relationships with tradespeople, right? They aren't in the contracting trades. And it means they're just looking for a contractor. They frequently flake out. They frequently mess up, and inspectors are like, no, no, no. And then they disappear with the money. And or yeah, they'll schedule you and say they're coming in 3 months, and then they really are not coming in 3 months. And it's a pretty common experience, especially for people who aren't in the trades. And we have looked at if there is a way for us to, right, provide a reliable pool of contractors that we have vetted. And I think what you're looking at really is just capacity there, because it means for that to really work, we would have to pay that group of people and manage them, right? Like instead of we can make we can't make a recommendation of products or services from the state to anyone is another issue. But when you get into it, most contractors in the state, they aren't going to be driving over mountain passes and blizzards to get to your ADU, like they're hyper local. And so it's something that in my wildest dreams, we would have in each region a group that you could choose to hire who would actually show up and do the work acceptably. But at the moment, that is definitely beyond our time and financial abilities, and just the way the state's structured. Very, very hard. These any capable contractor is usually, most of them are solo acts. There are very few groups that are managing teams of people. So it's been an interesting challenge. I am amazed at how many people do finish their units. I've been working on my house for 11 years and it's not done. And in 18 months, most of our people can produce fully functional units, and I am in awe of them every day. So I guess that means, yes, it's on the list. That's on a wish list for sure.
Well, I've got one more quick question, and unless anyone else has one. Okay, I'll take that as a no. We got about 5 minutes. So I'm curious, I guess, to your point about costs and Bob's point about contractor access, the small unit trainings that are being done, are there any takeaways or advice that you know of that you could maybe pass on to us? Because I think in Hancock and Washington counties, that's more or less the level of development that can occur and is occurring right now. And so to enhance that any more than is happening would be very useful.
I would have to check. I am aware that they're doing these, but I have not read the content of their presentation yet. So I was snowing and I
Anything
did
from
not go.
those would be helpful to
Yeah.
pass on if it's available, because I think we can take anything away from it.
Yeah, sure. And I know they have training materials that I can pass on to you. I can also, you can book Ben next month. The guy giving the trainings would probably be more than happy to meet with you and describe how that works.
Okay.
If you want
Yeah.
more Vermont information, but I'll see if I can get their materials. And
Okay. Yeah, that'd be very useful to share if you're able to.
right. And those are, I think, training people on how do you decide to do a project? Where do you do a project? What's the permitting? What, like they're doing the overall structure. So they're not necessarily people who know how to build a house at these trainings. Some of them are. There were quite a few contractors that came. So let's see what we've, yeah, I will get that to you in a follow-up.
Excellent. All right. Well, we're right up against time. That worked out pretty well. Thank you again, Erin, for joining us. That was all very informative and very useful, so I appreciate it. Again, this forum is recorded as they are every month, and that link will be shared out in an email, and it lives on our website as well, which I could post in the chat real quick in case you don't have access to it. Hopefully we'll get that up within the next week or so. And if Erin is interested, I can pass along any follow-up questions that you might have for her. Really appreciate your time again, Erin, and we will be doing this again next month. So stay tuned for a future topic. And thank you all again for your time. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Erin. Really impressive program.
Yeah,
Thanks.
It
definitely.
really is.
Yeah.
Say
Thanks,
my
everyone.
name and email are on our website if you ever have any burning middle of the night questions.
Thank you so very much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.